Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 9-game slate. Well, it's not that nice. There's 4 games with really bad weather potential issues. Those 4 games are the Tampa Bay, Chicago White Sox, Cleveland, Boston, Atlanta, New York Mets, and Pittsburgh, Washington games. All those games, the typically weather comes and goes, but those 4 games all look like they could be disrupted and potentially postponed, and we may get that information before the slate, hopefully. With that said, I'm going to operate as if those games are playing. I did want to shout out a home run call from yesterday, and Bruce Gant got a Rose Arena home run. He actually had 2 home runs, so congrats there. Before I get started, though, can you smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel. Drop your comments below about your home run calls today, and let's get into it here. So from the pitching perspective, or let me get my core plays here. William Contreras from Milwaukee, Michael Harris from Atlanta, and Josh Lowe from Tampa Bay on DraftKings. And over on FanDuel, Sonny Gray from Minnesota, William Contreras for Milwaukee, and Byron Buxton from Minnesota. So do keep those core plays in mind as we get going through here. So let's go ahead and start with our pitchers. We're going to start with Spencer Strider, who has had 9 strikeouts in every single game to start this season. He's got big-time upside here against the Mets, and he has really good upside and a really good floor for this situation. Assuming this game plays, he'd definitely be one of my top, picks for this particular slate. But there are some cheap or good pitchers against easier teams, and he just has the best strikeout upside on this particular slate. Dre Rasmussen for the Tampa Bay, also in a great matchup against Chicago White Sox. His K rate is nice, and he has a nice matchup here. He has smashed the below average teams, and that's what he gets to face today. And if this game plays, then he will be a great option on the slate. Sonny Gray here from Minnesota is a great option on the slate, and he's the first pitcher I'm mentioning that isn't at risk of being postponed. He started the season extremely good. He has a decent K rate, though it is a little bit inconsistent, but he has a good upside in this matchup. And while he didn't have a great game against Kansas City the first game of the season, he has good upside here. Even though it's priced up quite a bit, he's definitely worth consideration. Then we'll look at Johan Oviedo for Pittsburgh. Another guy that, if this game plays, he's a great P2 option. He's had 3 solid starts to start the season and 2 terrible ones, but he has a lot of good. He gets a lot of strikeouts when he plays well, when he pitches well, and he doesn't get them whenever he plays terribly. So the question there is which version of him you're going to get today. If the game plays, then he's definitely a high risk, high reward option, but he's a decent P2 play. Chris Bassett is in a really interesting spot here for Toronto. He has some good upside here. He's high risk, high reward due to the fact that he's one of the few guys that's in a P2 option that's actually priced fairly and doesn't have weather issues, so that's why I'm listing him here. But if all these games were to play, then I definitely wouldn't consider him as much, so do keep that in mind. As for the, see here, then we have Nestor Cortez for my last option here. He's also in a pretty good spot for the Yankees against Texas. Now, Texas is a really good team, and this could be a trouble spot for him, but he's one of the few cheap or expensive plays, or P1 plays that don't have weather issues for the slate, so do keep that in mind as well. He's definitely viable on this one. So let's move into our catchers here, and we're going to start with William Contreras from Milwaukee. He's in a really good spot. He's hitting the ball extremely well to start the year. He had a solid day yesterday, didn't even hit a home run, so that's very nice. And he's got some good upside again in this matchup, and he's got clean air for this game. Mike Zunino is a great value play for Cleveland. However, this game is at risk, so do keep that in mind. But he has some nice upside, and he's a good contrarian option off of Contreras. And then another good option is if you want to do a Toronto stack, Alejandro Kirk has some nice upside in this particular matchup against Seattle. He started the season pretty solidly, and he has home run potential. He did hit one the other day as well, so do keep that in mind. Then we'll look at first base here, and Ohtani obviously has big-time potential anytime he steps up to the plate. He's very expensive, and he's going to be somewhat hard to roster today, but he is definitely viable on this slate. Anthony Rizzo for the New York Yankees also has some utility here. I don't love the Yankees, but if you did stack them, he would be somebody you could definitely utilize since they have LeMahieu and Torres as well as good options to potentially stack up. Speaking of LeMahieu, he is viable at first base and third base. He's got some nice upside in this matchup. Again, it's not a great stack, but it's a decent one. And then Justin Turner for Boston. He has some pretty interesting upside in this matchup. He hasn't done much the last few games other than just getting some hits, but he has some big time upside and some good potential in this particular metric. However, that is a game that is risky on the slate. Maybe that's a second base here. We're going to start with Brandon Lowe. Now, Brandon Lowe has some really good upside. He is fairly expensive here, but he's actually come down in price a little bit, and so that definitely gives him some viability, and he's definitely in play here if this game plays. Gleyber Torres, again, for a Yankee stack, he is definitely in play at this position as a great option and has some really nice upside, and he's priced pretty fairly. And then Polanco for Minnesota. I really like Polanco today. He's one of the guys I think could potentially hit a home run out of these games that aren't weather logged, and he has some really good upside. He started the season extremely well since he's been back. And then Oswald Pereza, he has some Hail Mary vibes here today. High risk, high reward, but very cheap and helps you pay up for some other options. Moving up to third base, Josh Jung, he looks like a really good play today. He's somewhat risky due to going against Cortez, but he could also get to the bullpen, and he's got some really good upside here. He's had a pretty solid start to the season power-wise, and I think he's in a really good spot, and so he's definitely in consideration here. His price is also pretty fair. Gunnar Henderson is a cheaper option at $3,700. He can play shortstop as well, and he's got some good upside for this matchup. He's got good stuff and has a nice utility for this particular situation. Then we'll look at DJ LeMahieu, who I already mentioned, and then Brasso for Milwaukee is a good floor play here. He's actually doing okay this season now. He hasn't done much the last couple games, but he's got a really good matchup again here, and he has nice upside at this price. Then we'll look at Bo Bichette. Now, he has some good upside in this situation. I think he's a home run call today for me, but he is fairly expensive and somewhat hard to roster as a result. If all these games that have weather manage to get the games in, it will be easier to roster him simply because there'll be so much value open up. But Gunnar Henderson can also play at this position. Mud Rosario is also in play here for Cleveland. He's pretty priced fairly. He's a little bit risky, but he's got some nice upside and has a good matchup here against Chris Sale, who has not been very good so far. And then Hernandez for Boston, for Kiki Hernandez, that is. He's got some really interesting upside in this matchup if this game plays. He's definitely somebody that I would consider. He is much better at home than he is on the road, so do keep that in mind as well. And then Volpe is kind of a Hail Mary option for the shortstop position. He hasn't hit the ball particularly well, but he does occasionally have big games when he does start at the top of the lineup, so do keep that in mind. Moving on into the outfield, I really like Michael Harris a ton today. He's just underpriced, and he's got really good metrics for this particular situation. However, if this game doesn't play, that will be a disappointment because he's a great value option on the slate. Josh Lowe is also in a pretty good spot. He's been mashing the ball this season, and he's got a great matchup, and his price is still just cheap enough to be viable on this one, but he is somewhat risky due to that weather situation there. Mike Trout is obviously a great option today. He has high potential for a home run in this matchup, and he's had some really big games lately, so I really like his upside. Then we'll look at Rob Refsnyder for Boston. If this game plays, he'll be somebody that I'll try to push into my lineup. He has some nice upside here, though he hasn't been getting a lot of at-bats lately due to not starting, so we'll have to wait and see if he draws a start, but if he does, then he'll be somebody to consider on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at Byron Buxton, who is super expensive over here. He's more playable on FanDuel, but he's got some really nice upside. He's been hitting the ball extremely well since he got out of a slump, and so I really like the potential. Then we'll look at Jack Sawinski, who is also hitting the ball just extremely well. Pittsburgh is for real, it looks like, and he's one of the reasons why he is just mashing the ball, and he gets to face Washington again, which he has just been absolutely smashing every single game. Then we'll look at Bay for Pittsburgh. I also like him quite a bit. He can also kind of play second base if you want. He's got some good potential here and has nice upside and a positive situation. And then Taylor Ward. I thought about making him a core play instead of low simply because they're similar price range and he doesn't have the issue with the weather. But he hasn't been quite as good lately, so he's not, he's a little bit risky, but he has some nice upside and a good matchup here to boot. And then finally, Joey Gallo for Minnesota. He's got some really good upside in this matchup, has nice potential, and I really like his upside. His prices makes him a little harder to roster, but he's definitely viable on the slate. Moving over to FanDuel, we're going to start with Sonny Gray as a core play. Now, I wasn't going to do this, but I think it's probably best to do this over on FanDuel, simply because you only have one pitcher, and so the pricing is a lot higher here on these pitchers as well, and there's just less quality options at pitcher. Though Strider and Rasmussen both are in play here, Gray is a really good option, and he doesn't have the weather issues, and so that's why he included him here. But if any of those two games play, then they're both in play. And then Bassett for Toronto is also in play as a kind of a value option. He doesn't have the upside that Gray or Strider has, but he definitely has some potential. And then Nestor Cortez as well has some of that kind of potential. But they are a little bit riskier, and they are guys that I'm kind of touting because they're not in the weather issues of the top two, which are Strider and Rasmussen are in. So let's go ahead and get into our catchers and first baseman. Now, William Contreras is in a really good spot here. He played well and did well yesterday. He didn't even hit a home run, but he's got really nice upside. He's hitting the ball extremely well to start the year, and he's a great spot. Radley Rutschman is also a good option on this particular slate. He has some really good potential here. I do like the Baltimore stack a little bit, so do keep that in mind if this game does look like a pretty good stack, especially if all those other 4 games are, rained out or whatever. So DJ LeMahieu also in play, and he can play multiple positions today. He has some really good upside for this particular situation, and so I really like him as a good kind of a utility option that you can throw pretty much anywhere to help you fill out a good roster. Moving on to second base, Brandon Lowe. He's got some really good potential in this matchup, despite not hitting the ball great. He's got some, massive potential, but he tends to be somewhat boom or bust lately, so do keep that in mind. But DJ LeMahieu also has a really good upside here, which I already mentioned at this position. Torres can also play at this position, which is very beneficial here. He's got some really nice upside, and he feels really solid on this particular slate. Of course, my favorite play at this position is Jorge Polanco, who started the season extremely well, has really good upside, and has nice potential here. We'll look at third base here, and Josh Jung. Now, I have quite a few guys here at third base just because of the weather situations, but Josh Jung has really good upside in this matchup. He's got good home run potential, and he's got good power metrics for this particular matchup. Gunnar Henderson is somewhat of a high-risk, high-reward play, but due to his price, he's definitely viable on the slate and helps you pay up for some other options. LeMahieu can also start here. Matt Chapman is also in play at this position. If you pay down a pitcher a little bit, he's definitely somebody you can get in there. He's had 6 straight games in a row with pretty good fantasy output without a home run, so he's definitely in play in this slate. Justin Turner also in play, considering the fact that he's super cheap, and if this game does play, then he'll be a viable, great option. And then Mike Brosseau, he's a kind of a Hail Mary play at this position. High risk, high reward, but he's cheap, and he helps you pay up for other options. Moving on to the shortstop, and we're going to look at Bo Bichette. He has some really good utility here. Though he is fairly expensive, he definitely is a home run call for me today, and I really love the metrics for him. Gunnar Henderson is I already mentioned him as kind of a cheaper Hail Mary option for this position. Nick Ahmed, sorry, not Nick Ahmed, Ahmed Rosario, rather. Uh, he has some really good potential in this game. He hasn't hit the ball particularly well, but he has good utility and has nice upside on this particular situation. And then Carlos Correa for Pittsburgh. What am I looking at? For Minnesota, he hasn't hit the ball well to start the year, but he still has good potential and home run potential each time he comes out. And he's definitely in play today at this price, especially with the weather-related risks. Moving into the outfield, we'll look at Mike Trout. He's actually not as expensive as I expected him to be on FanDuel, but he is still expensive, but he is viable. He hit 2 home runs yesterday. He's got good potential to do it again today. Michael Harris is a great option on this slate. He is really unlikely to play due to the rain, but if he does draw the start, then it would definitely be, if that game does play, then he's definitely a top tier option. Ohtani also has some nice upside, though I like Trout better today. If you want to pay up for one guy, he'd be a decent alternative to Trout. Ref Snyder also in a great spot here. He hasn't hit the ball well, but occasionally he has some really nice games, and typically when his metrics jump off the chart, and today is one of those days. He hasn't started in several games though, so to keep that in mind. But if he does draw the start, he's definitely in play. Byron Buxton is a core play. Ever since he started the season off really rough, but he's really starting to get going, and he's been getting hits in almost every game for the last 9 or 10 games. So he looks like a great option on the slate. And he's priced pretty fair. Jack Sawinski is also a great option here for Pittsburgh. If this game plays, he will be in my lineup, but I just don't know if the game will play at this point. Then Josh Lowe, he's a little bit overpriced here on FanDuel, more priced fairly on DraftKings actually, but he's got really good potential here as a good option. George Springer is a nice value play here on FanDuel. He's just too cheap for his potential, but he hasn't been particularly great to start the year. But he does have home run potential. He hasn't hit one since they played Tampa Bay a few series ago, so he's got some nice upside. He's had a couple games off too, so hopefully get him going. Hopefully he can get going, and that will, this price point will pay off for us. Taylor Ward is also a great option today for the Angels. He hasn't been particularly great hitting wise, but he has home run potential and he has nice upside in this matchup. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.